Welcome back to Tiny Grimes Games, and I'm here with another Star Wars Destiny video. And that's right, the long-awaited moment is upon us. It's been months in the making, or so it feels. The new fact, the new RRG, the new rules update essentially is out. We've got some big stuff coming down the pike. So I'm not going to go through every little bit of information. You can find these at other sources. What I'm going to talk about are the big things. So, number one. Nines is nerfed, maybe into oblivion. It's a pretty serious nerf. So if you've missed it, there's something called the balance of the force, where we now have updated point costs for characters, and Nines is +2. Now, Nines at 12, 15 is really not that crazy. Like, I still think he would be one of the potentially best cards in the game, because you still have Boundless Ambition plays, to be able to do absurd things and do 10 damage out of nowhere. But in addition to just Nines being hit, there was an overall nerf to the way, or I guess I should say a change to the way that upgrades are handled. So now you can only do one replace upgrade per turn, or per round, per player. So in other words, if I'm the Nines players, once per round I can do a replace where I pay less and overwrite a weapon, and that's it. After that, I can't do that anymore. So what happened to Nines is, not only did he get a point increase, we took away that crazy play from him, which was probably good. And the same thing with Rey. You can no longer go like, I'll play a 4-speed, and then I'll play a holdout blaster, and I'll overwrite the holdout blaster with a Vibroknife, and then I'll overwrite that with another weapon, and then I'll roll out, and I'll get 7 million actions. That stuff has all been reined in a bit, and I think that's really good. On the one side, I feel really weird about it. Like, really? Like, there's 2 broken cards, yet we're going to change, like, the whole mechanics of the game to do that? That makes me feel weird. I don't like it just from that perspective, unless there was already a thought like, I don't know, should we be limiting upgrades to 1? And maybe this was that way at the beginning, 1 upgrade, and people said, no, let's try it out, and then we see the negative results, then I think it's great. But if it's simply a knee-jerk reaction to do 2 cards, yeah, I'd rather see those cards get nerfed. But either way, it's nice to see Nines get really reined in and Rey get reined in to a degree. The question is Nines good anymore? And I don't know. I mean, I have a feeling he's not garbage. I mean, 12 for a single die is not terrible. That is not terrible when you have a pretty good ability. You can still do something like play an upgrade on Nines, overwrite it. That's twice you did his ability, then roll him out. Like, that's a really strong card, a really strong play. He still has 11 health. The problem is now he's a 12 cost single die character with a bad die. That's really what it comes down to now. So I think Nines is going to cycle out of the meta for a little bit, and you never know. Maybe he works his way back. Another huge nerf is the Phasma nerf. So Phasma was inexplicably 913. No one knew why. It obviously was broken. It paired way too well with those, 13, 17 guys like Anakin and Kylo. And she's only 1 more point. That 1 point changes everything. So now she's 10-14. This shakes up the whole metagame. We basically took out all of what are currently the tier 1 decks and tossed them aside. So we lost Kylo Phasma. We lost Anakin Phasma. We lost Kylo Nines. We lost Rainbow Nines. So we lost every deck that we looked at and said, that's a tier 1 meta warping deck. They're all gone. And you might say, well, doesn't that leave room for Thrawn to pop up and dominate? No, because Unkar got +2. That one to me is one of the most mind-boggling changes that I can see. Unkar has no damage. He has no mill sides. The only way to get a mill side is to toss away 3 points worth of dice, which is a ton, to remove a card from the other opponent's hand. And then maybe you get resources back. Maybe you don't, depending on their deck. I always felt like Unkar was this card that was my favorite designed card in the game. Like, he does nothing unless you can build a really cool engine around him. And yes, I agree, Thronkar in this new meta would be kind of broken because stuff like Crime Lord and Ace in the Hole would probably have been too strong. Buyout would have been too strong. But for me personally, I say let's nerf the cards that are too strong rather than nerfing this really, really cool card. It makes me incredibly sad to see Unkar go away. I mean, 10-13, he was bonkers. 12-15 for a dude who doesn't really do anything? I don't know. I mean, I personally will be trying Elite Thrawn single die Unkar and seeing. I don't think it'll work that great, but I'm going to try it and see. But I'm really sad. That's the one that makes me sad. All the other Balance of the Force changes, I'm cheering. Yes, let's fix the game. And then Unkar, and I'm like, what? What are you doing? You can't hit my boy Unkar. So that one makes me sad, but it is what it is, right? Unkar is dead? Maybe? I don't know. The problem also is by killing Unkar, is Thrawn now garbage? Like, when I first saw Thrawn, my initial thought was no damage, 17 elite, that's really expensive. Like, there better be a real way to make this work. And with Unkar, we found that not only does mill work really well, you can play vehicle decks, you can do stuff. I think that Thrawn is back down to kind of my initial gut reaction of 17 is just too much for a dude that literally does nothing. Like, I'm really eager to see what his partner is, because you know he's not just going to disappear. So what do people start doing with him? I don't know. I don't think Thrawn Kylo is any good at all. Do people start to go 14 for one Thrawn die just to get that ability, and then 16 elsewhere? Maybe? I don't. That doesn't sound strong to me. So I don't know what's going to happen with Thrawn. I feel like he's dead for Empire at War, and now he's just like, hey, it's me, Thrawn, waiting for a partner. And I don't like that either. I just don't like the change to Unkar. I would have much rather seen changes to the other cards. And I know you could say, well, really, Tiny? Like, we have to nerf several cards, or we could just nerf the one. But the one is, I don't know, it was so interesting. It was so special. It was so different in this game that's all about just rolling damage. He was the one dude who was like, no, it's not about rolling damage. You can do all kinds of stuff. Like, he was in damage decks, right? Like, that we had Funkar, which was a damage-dealing deck featuring a dude that didn't deal damage. That was freaking amazing. And those options are gone, and that makes me incredibly sad. I will weep tonight for my dearly departed Unkar. So that makes me sad. Poe moves up. He gets a +2. Whatever. I'm fine with that. I think for me personally, the appropriate measure was to nerf Maz. But I get it, right? If you nerf Maz, what does Hero have? Sabine Ezra, nothing else? Like, Maz is really critical to making an underpowered faction function. So I understand that if we're going to hit half of Poe Maz, let's hit Poe. What's interesting is Poe Maz has been a 100% non-factor. So it feels kind of weird. Like, we're going to nerf all the busted decks and randomly Poe. And you're like, what? It's like a history book. Like, rolling out the history book and being like, we need to nerf the Romans. They had an awesome empire 2,000 years ago. Let's get them. That shouldn't. They will never do that again. You're like, they're dead thousands of years. Well, they won't get that opportunity again. So I don't know. It's actually entirely possible that with all these nerfs, Poe Maz would have jumped back up to that #1 slot, and maybe that's what happened. Maybe there was playtesting done with these changes, and people said, "Oh, we better hit the Poe Maz deck. It's just going to jump right up." And without it, it does allow for all kinds of interesting things. So the meta, just with the changes I've mentioned so far, the meta's opening up to things like 3-character decks, 4-character decks, stuff that doesn't get wrecked by one aggro turn or like losing on turn 2. We have more possibilities. And there was another huge errata, and that is Vibroknife is different. Vibroknife now says when you resolve it, whatever dice are attached to it, that is immune to shields and force illusion and the like. That is a huge change. Oh my goodness, is that a huge change? So that's going to be really big. That's gonna make shield decks much more relevant, unless of course people just start running other anti-shield tech. So between all of these changes, I feel like we're in a different world now. Like the game is different, and for me it's really exciting. I haven't been playing a ton because I expected this to drop pretty much with Empire at War, so I decided, well, I'm not going to get serious about Empire at War until this drops. And here we are a long time later. I haven't played a ton of Empire at War because I've been waiting for this. So for me, this is like this is basically like, hey guys, Empire at War just dropped. So I'm, my energy is renewed. I'm excited once more to play some Destiny. So let's talk real quick then about where we stand, what decks are going to be good coming out of this. And the answer is, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that looks promising. Like, obviously, whenever an aggro deck leaves the Destiny meta, a new monster steps up to take its place. But there's nothing quite as broken as those 17-13 combos that we saw. We've got a 16-14 in, like, Elite Django, Elite new Phasma. I don't know. Like, Django Veers ended up just fizzling out. This feels like a slightly better version of Django Veers. But is a slightly better version of Django Veers 3 sets later actually good? I'm not 100% convinced by that. It's definitely a deck I'll be trying. Sabine Ray is definitely going to be a lot of people's default aggro deck. And what's interesting is if those two character decks sort of replace the other two character decks and become prevalent in the meta, then we have Prized Possession still having a really good spot. So let's shift over to there. I still feel like, even with this nerf to Unkar, there are a lot of decks that can make a ton of money. Just having Houndstooth and the Chance Cube in almost any deck is a lot of money. Last night I played a Jabba Dooku deck, and if you think about that, that is 4 dice with focus. Now you've got Houndstooth. Now you've got Chance Cubes. That's a way to make a lot of money, and I instantly had piles and piles of cash. And so I think any number of these millish, slowy, control-y decks are going to be strong. Buyout didn't get hit. Buyout is still bonkers. I actually lost that game I was talking about last night, but it was only because I got Buyout so late. Had I got Buyout turn 2, it'd have been like a 12-point Buyout turn 2. That would have really shaped the game in my favor. And so Buyout is going to continue to be a really strong card. I'm frankly shocked that nothing was done to it. Like, even if you want to say cap it at 10, fine. Cap it at 8. Like, 8 seems reasonable to me. A turn and a half. Being able to go like a turn 3 Buyout for 15 seems bonkers. And I think that deck is a real legit deck. And the interesting thing about these make money decks that want to play Buyout is you have a lot of choices for what you round it out with. And we've talked about this before, that control decks really need the meta to settle. So if the meta settles into 2 character decks, Crime Lord Ace in the Hole is still wonderful. Prized Possession is still wonderful. If it moves more into 3, 4 character decks, I think just having piles of shields is going to be really strong, just to be able to mill them out. Get that early Buyout, personal shield, maybe some sabotages and confiscations to slow people down. I think these decks are still going to do well. They did lose Imperial Inspection. We should note that. That was a huge change. That card is a dead card, I think. Now, instead of just bouncing cards endlessly for 0, which was frankly absurd and obscene, now it's not as good. It goes away, and that's a real problem. I really wish they would have changed it to something like cost 1 and goes back to your hand. Something that's like mirroring what your opponent's doing. It's less resources for you. It's a way to have continual control. I think that card is essentially garbage unless the meta moves into like some 2-turn meta where they want the 2-drop right away. I just can't even really conceive of the spot for it. But bottom line is, I think slow, control-y, shield-based mill decks will have a real shot. Less so at the start, but as the meta situates itself and these cards know what to slot in to stay alive, I think it'll do better. The deck that I'm really excited about going back to is something like old Phasma, Guavian, Trooper. You know, this idea of having Guardian. If there is no Vibroknife, does that mean you can run crazy things like Personal Shield in that deck and just live forever with your Guardians? Hunker Downs, like, all of this becomes reasonable. We also have far more redeploy weapons than we had before that are reasonable. And just being able to have, like, I built a deck and it was nearly every weapon was a redeploy, and I was just like, dang, this is some sick stuff right here. So that's another deck that I think pay attention to. And these 4-character decks, like, we can make some pretty serious, legit 4-character decks. You have stuff like Aftermath giving you a million resources in them. The bottom line is, this is a really exciting time to play Destiny. If you have some deck that's a little bit cute, that was just too cute for the old meta and just got blasted apart, especially if it was a shield-based deck. Like, I saw a really cute Qui-Gon new Rey deck. It was double die Rey, single die Qui-Gon. Looks like garbage. Like, I looked at it and was like, this is the worst deck I've ever seen. But it was so cute and did all these little shield tricks. I was like, dang, that is interesting. In the old meta, that would have just been a disaster, right? You're just like, oh, you're going to screw around, and I'm going to slaughter all your guys. And so the question is, if the meta does slow down, which to be very clear on, I'm not convinced it will. I think there's going to be some new aggro decks that pop up. But if it does, there are so many opportunities for interesting decks. But I will say this, over the next week to 2 weeks, the game's going to be really interesting, and it almost feels like a new set dropped. Like, that's how dramatic these changes are. Vehicle decks have a real shot now that they didn't before. Remember when we all thought Maserati was the deck? And some of us were saying, like, it looks cool, but what happens when they just run a 17 and a 13 and roll damage for days and slaughter you? Turn 1, Maz is dead. And you're like, I had people, like, I said, like, well, what about when Maz dies turn 1? Which he does all the time. Like, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine if Maz dies turn 1. I'm like, no, it's not. It's absolutely not. Like, you're going to die because that means turn 2, another character's dead. But now, maybe the meta's just slow enough where something like Maserati becomes really interesting. And so, again, we are in the best period we've been in a long time for Destiny. A long time. Because remember pre-Gen Con, it was real ugly. So we're talking several months here that the game has kind of stagnated, waiting for this rules reference guide. It's here. Enjoy it. I'm telling you. Play a lot of Destiny the next 2 weeks because metas settle. Metas settle down. The meta's going to get a little boring again. This is your moment. If you want that fun time, play crazy decks, go to it. Also, Elite Kanan, couple blue characters. There's some stuff. There's some stuff out there. Have some fun. I'll see you next time on Tiny Grimes Games.